Welcome everyone to the Applied Ergonomics Conference webinar series. We are excited to have you with us today. Just a quick reminder that we are hosting the annual conference March 21st to the 24th in Orlando, Florida. Head to our website for more information. Today we are excited to be presenting in a new format. We will be having a conversation with our guest instead of the traditional webinar PowerPoint. Please let us know what you think. We encourage you to post questions in the Q&A and chat, which we will answer at the end of the session. It is my great pleasure to introduce and welcome Dr. Lauren Gant. Welcome,
Hi,
Lauren.
Carrie. Hi, I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yes, I'm really excited to hear more about the topic that we're discussing today. Lauren, before we get started, are you willing to share a little bit about yourself with the audience?
Yes, I would love to. Yes, my name is Lauren Gant. I am the Senior Ergonomics and Wellness Strategist at H&I. My role really focuses around thinking about the needs of humans in today's working environment from the perspective of health, wellness, safety, and comfort. I would say my passion and my purpose, my drive at work is really about focusing on people and understanding what they need to be comfortable and productive wherever and however they're working. So my background is in biomedical engineering with an emphasis in ergonomics and biomechanics. So I don't come from the realm of medicine or neurodiversity at all, but this idea of neurodiversity is something that I've really been looking into and that I'm passionate about. So I'm really excited to introduce this topic with you today or to start a conversation about it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So really today our focus is on workspace considerations to welcome and support neurodiversity.
Mm-hmm.
So our first question, or the first question that we generated is, what is neurodiversity?
What is it? Yeah, if we're going to talk about it, we might as well define it, right? So to oversimplify, neurodiversity is really an appreciation or an understanding that there are really vast differences in the way our brains process inputs. And our discussions around neurodiversity are often focused on considerations for those with neurological impairments, like autism spectrum disorder. However, we can also discuss considerations for more subtle differences in the way we respond to inputs from the world. So we can think about the way we process the world with all of our senses and how our sensitivity to these inputs can range from hypersensitive to hyposensitive or maybe an underreaction. And in fact, we can have hypersensitivities and hyposensitivities within the same sense. So for example, some noises may be more triggering. We may be more sensitive to some kinds of noises than other types of noises. So when we think about designing around neurodiversity or designing with neurodiversity in mind, it really asks us to think about how the inputs of the space can impact that comfort, the feeling of security for this diverse population. So things like color and sound and smell, really even the space layout itself. And it's really hard, but we have to think not just from our individual perspective, but really considering the perspective of others, like those on the autism spectrum and how they may perceive the space as well. So it's important to be cognizant of these considerations while designing spaces and really recognize that everyone is not going to respond to the spaces in the same way. So what may be completely benign to me may be really distracting or debilitating for another person. Something like a pattern on a carpet, for example. I may not even notice it, but that might be really something that is challenging for someone else to even overcome. So it's also going to take quite a bit of sensitivity and understanding and vulnerability, really, while we're having these conversations and thinking more broadly about this in the space.
Okay. So why do you think considerations for neurodiversity are becoming more prominent in the field of ergonomics?
Well, I would say when I started in this field, I've been with H&I for almost 10 years. My focus was really on ergonomics only. And it still is really important. I still think a lot about ergonomics, but since that time, my focus, and I really think our industry's focus for human-based design has rightfully expanded tremendously. So we're still thinking about reducing the risk of injury over long periods of time, but we're also thinking more broadly about how people are working, what we need to be comfortable and healthy. So things like wellness are becoming more of a topic of conversation, considering the whole person physically and mentally and what we need to be healthy and supported. Topics like psychological safety are becoming more prevalent, creating spaces and opportunities for people to have this sense of security, to feel safe taking interpersonal risks, to feel respected and accepted. And I think ultimately the area of human-based design has grown to even include the ideas of inclusivity and empowerment in the space, and understanding how we can create environments, cultures, spaces where we can all feel welcome and inspired to be ourselves, and really to contribute with vulnerability, with empathy, and as autonomous individuals. So what we're learning, I think what we know is that if we create spaces that are inclusive, that consider psychologically safe practices, companies only stand to benefit, as well as the employees within those companies. We become better at problem solving, we become more innovative, we become more creative. A good friend of mine who is really an expert in design for neurodiversity, a trailblazer in this field, her name is AJ Perrin. She has this quote that I love repeating. It's, the more inclusive we become, the more problems we solve. And I think that's really what we're driving towards here. So considerations for health, wellness, inclusivity are fundamental to creating spaces that are productive and creative and welcoming for all individuals. And I think neurodiversity is a paramount part of this conversation.
Okay. How does neurodiversity, as we talk about ergonomics, how does neurodiversity impact or change those ergonomic considerations?
I don't know if it changes at all, but I do think ergonomics is inherently important to thinking about neurodiversity and supporting a neurodiverse population. The bottom line is that furniture and work tools should not distract from the task at hand, but instead they should create comfortable and healthy work postures. So for some individuals with neurological impairments, what we call sensory integration may be difficult. It can be difficult to manage multiple inputs or multiple distractions, especially for individuals with sensory neurological impairments. So for these individuals, it's especially important that their physical and visual comfort do not distract from what they're trying to do at work. And really, I think this is an example of how inclusive design can actually benefit everyone within the space, because I think we can all agree that we can all benefit from ergonomic considerations. So things like seating, work surfaces, work tools should have the capability to be properly adjusted and positioned to promote healthy postures, to promote comfortable working postures. And products should be designed to support a broad spectrum of individuals physically, but they should also be intuitive for all to use and make those adjustments for themselves. We have to think about things like interactions between seating and surfaces, if those are allowing sufficient clearances. And additionally, I think it's important that the product aesthetic should also visually communicate that a product is usable, a chair is usable. So things that are overly narrow or very low or overly reclined, or that even have a complicated color or materiality. They may add complexity, and they may inadvertently increase anxiety around whether that product is usable or not.
Okay. I was in a conference room the other day and sat on a chair, and the room itself is brightly lit, and then you have chairs around it and a screen, and so you get reflection, and the chairs were bright orange. And then I sat on the chair, it was too low. I felt like a little kid with my chin sitting at the table, and the back went way back, so I couldn't even lean back. I had to perch. And so my attention to what was going on in the meeting was significantly less. So I can only imagine how that type of environment might impact someone, with a neurodiverse concern.
Yeah, and I think all of us are not very good at sort of pulling apart those inputs, right? Even those of us who are neurotypical, we may feel like, I'm so stressed right now. This meeting is so hard. And it may be, that the fluorescent lights are too harsh, or it may be some other input that we're sort of overlapping with our stress in that moment. So I think for all of us, it's an important consideration to pull apart those things and really make sure that we're being thoughtful, especially for the neurodiverse.
So what considerations for furniture or products are important when thinking about welcoming a neurodiverse population into the workplace?
Yeah, there are a whole slew of things, and I'm gonna pick 3 to talk about here. I think I'm going to talk about options for privacy, options for movement, and then some considerations for air quality. So I think when we think about privacy, especially today, the office is increasingly becoming focused on going there for social activities, right? We're going to the office to collaborate, to have these impromptu conversations. And I think it's important that while we're fostering that's important, but while we're doing that, we also remember to provide opportunities for privacy or places of refuge. So that individuals who may feel overstimulated can find those more subtle areas. They can get away for a moment, even if it's for a short duration, to do what they need to do to make it through their day. So, we see things like architectural walls being used to divide spaces, open spaces. We see additions of acoustical solutions to foster speech privacy, to give this sense of solitude and privacy within the space. And even in an open office, we see things like high products that go over your head, kind of give that protection from above and behind, that can block distraction. They can kind of serve as a temporary retreat. So what I want to say here, the main point here on this thought about privacy, is that we want those areas of interest, we want those areas of complexity in the workspace and those areas to get that engagement, but that needs to be balanced with some thought for lower stimulation, for places for focused work or individual work or meditation or decompression, whatever that is. So we need to find this balance, and not everything can be that conference room, Carrie, with the bright orange chairs, right? You needed to come back and find some solitude somewhere. So the second thought is this idea of options for movement. So the research tells us, we know well, that the benefits of dynamic movement are vast for all individuals. And in addition to these physical benefits, movement can have benefits on our cognitive profiles as well. So movement can be helpful for some individuals in allowing focus, in promoting attention, and even processing information. So providing some furniture that allows movement, that allows fidgeting, can be beneficial. What I do want to emphasize with this idea of fidget furniture or movement furniture is that sometimes I'm concerned when I'm talking with clients that they have this picture of designating a certain area with fidget furniture, or sort of labeling certain areas as for certain individuals. And I would advise heavily against that. I think that if we can instead have product that is available for all to use, it sort of destigmatizes that and makes, maybe promotes a culture where fidgeting, where movement and these sort of active conversations are more acceptable, and really universal. So that's so movement is something that we can really find universally helpful, and especially for a neurodiverse population. And then the third point I want to make here is about air quality. So everybody today knows what a MERV 5 filter is, right? We know more about air quality than we've ever thought we wanted to know in the past because of the need to mitigate disease. But what we know is that air quality has always been and will always be important to our health. And especially for those with compromised immunities or disabilities, air quality can be really important. Cognitive function and productivity are supported by better air quality. So when we're putting product into spaces, when we're putting carpeting, chairs, desks into spaces, it's important to consider the minimize the VOCs, think about the air quality, because furniture can contribute to that overall profile of what we're inhaling in our spaces. So privacy, movement, air quality, I think are three things to think about.
It's a great place for all of us to start thinking about that. All right, what other considerations for space planning or layout are important for us to think about?
Yeah, I think we need to do sort of a day in the life, walk through the space and think about how we process the environment with all of our senses. I mean, we could talk about all of this ad nauseum, but I think generally some things to consider would be acoustics, something I've mentioned before. We are using spaces differently post-COVID than we were pre-COVID. When we go into a space that has a lower percentage of occupancy than we had, than the space was designed for, if we only have 50% of people in the space, that white noise, that hum in the office is much lower. Voices are much more obvious. Typing is much more obvious. So thinking about how you're using the space and what the acoustic profile is, and planning for that can be really important. So thinking about acoustical elements, thinking about white noise, thinking about fluorescent lights. To your point, you could hear those fluorescent lights. Some people can hear that, and that's overly distracting, as well as like the harsh feeling you get from those lights. And then noises from equipment as well. What is the printer? Where is that located? Is that distracting to individuals? I would also think about the patterns and colors you're using in the space. To your point, some of that engagement is fostered with some interests there, but do you also have places that are more subtle? Patterns on carpeting especially are tricky because some people who are neurodivergent may find that hard to navigate a space. They may be looking for patterns where a neurotypical individual may not be looking for patterns. Smells are something that we often neglect to think about in the office until somebody puts their fish in the microwave, right? So thinking about how, where are the eating spaces located compared to where the working spaces are, and the ventilation in those environments. Thinking about lighting, do we have access to natural lighting? And also, my blinds are closed because if they weren't, that light would be blinding me right now. So do we have the access to natural lighting, but do we also have the ability to control that to meet our needs? And then I would just say, again, this idea of overall stimulation. Are there places that we can go for quiet concentration and respite areas? And I think what I'm emphasizing here is that there's a lot we can do on the physical side to create spaces that are thoughtful and thoughtful for neurodivergent, but also that help us all and that aren't overly taxing for us to do. I also want to say that there are lots of policy and cultural aspects that I'm not, that I haven't talked about that are important to consider as well.
Sure. I think this is a conversation you and I could probably continue for a long time.
I think so.
Are there pros or barriers to creating a neurodiverse workplace?
I mean, I I think the evidence is there that there's lots of pros to creating a neurodiverse workforce. When I talk about an inclusive environment, what I think about as an inclusive environment is one that really allows diversity to thrive. So we know that representation is important, and so are the ideas of receptivity, so that respect for diversity and fostering unique strengths and perceptions, not just checking the box. This idea of fairness, and what I mean by fairness is not necessarily equality, but equity, so creating access and opportunities to resource and leadership roles and input decisions. But what we know is that when this inclusive environment is perceived by employees, we can really show up as our whole true selves. We're more satisfied with our work environment. We're more willing to contribute our ideas and our what we bring to the office is what we give when we're at work, when we feel like we can show up as we are. So what we've found is that we saw this with ADA, I think, too, is that when we design what we think is for a quote unquote special population or a select population, what we're actually doing is creating spaces that are great for everyone to use. So I think that's definitely the pro here, is that we have this opportunity to come out ahead if we can think bigger about it. As far as barriers, I think one of the major barriers right now is just understanding where to start. What's the best path forward, given the diversity in our population, and also given the diversity in the work being done, and just the world we live in right now is it feels like nothing is certain right now. So that it feels big and it feels scary, and I think this barrier can be overcome through research and really through communication and a commitment to make it right. So if we start from those places of being vulnerable and really being empathetic, I think we can overcome this barrier. And then I would say another barrier, is that the culture really needs to align with what the built environment is doing too. Those things really have to work together to foster an inclusive environment. Policy needs to foster that as well. And all of those things need to be hitting on all cylinders so we can show up and feel comfortable and safe in our work environments.
It sounds like we're implementing an ergonomics program.
Yeah, we're all experts already, right?
Right. So I've seen the term spiky profile used in regards to neurodiversity. Can you explain what this is, and does it help or hinder an employer's understanding, of a potential employee who might be neurodiverse?
Yeah, good question. My understanding is that neurodivergent individuals tend to have spiky profiles, meaning that they are good at some things and bad at other things, just like all of us, but that with neurodivergent individuals, the difference between those things tends to be much more obvious or greater. The term savant comes to mind, and I'm not willing to speak on whether that is a thing that we should be thinking about. But I think what's important to remember is that if an individual is less comfortable or less skilled in one area, it says nothing about other capabilities. We can't make these gross assumptions, right? So for example, if an individual is not capable or uncomfortable with verbal communication, it says nothing about their intellectual abilities or their physical abilities. And I think that's something that we all have to, take a minute and process our inherent biases there and think about that a little bit more deeply. And I think what we should take away from this conversation is that we cannot really know ever what someone else is capable of without really understanding who they are and where they come from and how they want us to show up for them. So starting this communication, starting this open dialogue, and really being, again, vulnerable here can be really impactful, I think.
Yeah. How can embracing neurodiversity lead to an innovative workplace?
You know, I think if we can get to a place where we all feel welcome and comfortable to contribute, we will bring our not only our diversity and our neurodivergence, but our diversity in our perspectives, our history, our processing of the world. We only stand to be more creative in our problem solving. The trick here is that we can't just bring that to work. We actually have to feel comfortable and secure voicing that, and being supported to do that without fear of retribution or humiliation or anything like that. So it's again creating these environments that welcome and support neurodiversity, and then also have the psychological safety and the inclusive culture to create these innovative and exciting environments.
So do you have one piece of advice that you can leave our audience with as to how to begin creating a neurodiverse workplace?
Yes, I actually have two. I think the first would be to read, to start researching. I can recommend this great book by AJ Perrin called The Interior Design for Autism. It's a great place to start. It has lots of background, but also really tangible things to think about as we're designing spaces. And I would say the second would be to start a conversation, to start talking more openly about it, about neurodiversity, making it less of a scary topic. I think you can use this webinar as a jumping off point for these conversations. You know, hey, I listened to, Lauren Gant talk about neurodiversity. What do you think? What's your experience? Let's talk more about this. So I think if we can start talking, if we can start reading, we only stand to come out on top.
Wonderful. I'm going to be using this. I've been taking notes as we've
Great.
been going.
Good.
So thank you so much for answering my questions. Now let's see what our audience has to ask. So let's see. So one of our questions from Michelle, I've noticed that employees with ADHD struggle with crowded staff rooms with many distractions, constant social interactions that they find uncomfortable. Many companies will not alter this design, even for a medical accommodation. I found sitting at a cubicle, I apologize, it's a little hard to read. I apologize. I found sitting at the end of a cubicle row helps a little, on the end where people are not constantly walking by to get to their stations. So I guess the question is, how do we deal with that when you don't have a lot of control over the environment, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, this is heartbreaking, right? That someone would feel like they can't get their employer to hear them, to understand that it's not just a personal preference, it's actually something that I need to be productive in the work environment. And it's also, it seems like they're not asking for, something that is unattainable. So I think that Michelle's point about finding, if you are in this environment, first thing is, can you find a way to make it work for you? It sounds like sitting at the end of the cubicle row helps Michelle. But I would urge you, if you feel comfortable, to continue having those conversations. Can you share this piece of, this webinar, or can you share other material with your manager, with your HR department, to start a conversation about sensitivity around these conversations as well?
Okay. Well, that appears to be all the questions we have today. So Lauren, thank you so much for sharing your expertise. If to the audience, if you have enjoyed the conversation we had, please consider joining us in Orlando in March to share in the conversation. Have a wonderful holiday season, everyone. Thank you again, Lauren.
Thank you, Carrie. This is great. Take care.
Take care.